the thank you is for putting this into a kind of global perspective. And Saskia, we're going to ask you to stay on the stage just for 10 minutes for questions and answers. And we're really happy to introduce Michael Žantovsky, politician, author, lyricist, psychologist, ambassador, formerly to the UK. Now, most recently, the executive director of the Aspen Institute, the first Aspen Institute in Central Europe, and currently the executive director of Václav Havel Library, which coincidentally shares the same courtyard as us. You prefer. So, Mr. Žantovsky, thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for having me here. This was more food for thought than
you were ready for.
Yeah.
This early in the morning.
It is early in the morning. It will take me about a week to digest. But I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. I mean, these days when people in our hopelessness discuss migration, so you hear very general statements like we're all migrants, and at some level, of course, it is.
If it only were so simple, you see. I mean, I love the image. It's a good image.
So I was very happy that you delved into the different kind of migrants, because that's much more instructive. You know, as for me, I'm the ultimate non-migrant. I live in this town, and I still live in the same house I was born in. At the same time, I spent one third of my life abroad. So who am I? And so I would like to ask you about another type of migrants. And actually, they have a lot to do with some of the processes you describe: economic processes, globalization processes, financial processes, and what we call expats. You know, yes. They are people who migrate, but they don't necessarily become attached to a place they migrate. They come back, or they go to another place. Their home is where they hang their hats.
Right.
And they behind, you know, many of these boardroom and backroom processes that you pointed at. So what about them?
Well, I mean, you know, they are. I have a bit of a spiel on that. So here is the image that it produces for the reader who's just enjoying the notion of all these expats. You know, so there are people from India, from China, from New York, from Prague, from, you know, etc. And all these differences coming together. I think that world, that is a geography that cuts across north-south divides, that cuts across east-west divides. There is enormous fluidity. Mm-hmm. I think they're all being flattened into a sort of corporate subject. They're not all corporates, I know that, but many are. A corporate subject that. And they, you know, and it's a very particular class of people, I think. And it doesn't matter where they come from. So here you have a visual landscape of all these different nationalities, different dress. You know, some do like to wear their own. Mm-hmm. And you know what? They're just one class. These geographies of centrality, which occupy only parts of every country, but have and say it is just a bit of Hong Kong, just a bit of New York, just a bit of whatever, you know. So that's also probably just a bit of Prague, you know, not the whole of Prague. So these are invisible. Again, they exist. They are marked by very specific conditions, possibilities, you know, enhancements. You have everything you want. It's like a strategic space that is invisible to our eyes, but that is very real and very material. We pick up on little elements of it, you know, the new type of corporate building, the new type of five-star hotel, etc. Right? So no matter how different they are from their nationalities, they're all the same.
Right.
Really, there is a poverty of something there. The migrants, on the other hand, the poorer, I mean, they're not all poor, but they wind up poor by the time they have paid the trafficker. Huh? They are all from different, thick cultures. And so when I think, for instance, about what makes our big cities cosmopolitan, people think it's all these educated classes. You don't quite get there just with educated classes. And you can have that in a small town, a very educated class, you know. No. I think the cosmopolitanism of our big cities comes from these thick, really thick, diverse cultures where some elements then travel, get, refined, distilled, and then they wind up in between its ethnic food and whatever, and then they wind up in the elites where they give really content. It's like Bach's, some of Bach's beautiful music that you just want to jump up and start dancing. To my husband's horror, I always. Well, because it comes from folklore. They were dance music. There was not church music. There was dance music. And so so this new fancy international class, very homogeneous, no matter how different they look. And I think that's another way in which the material doesn't quite tell you the full story. That was a long answer,
well,
I'm sorry.
That would lead me to my second question. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the normal people who migrate bring with them their cultures, their histories, their identities. The problem sometimes is it's both an advantage and a problem because they bring more diversity to our societies.
It's a challenge,
et cetera,
not
et
a problem.
But also challenges.
It's a challenge.
Identities don't migrate. I mean, migrants do. Or identities migrate across over time.
Right.
And this opens the question of integration and, in the past, assimilation. In the more recent past, multiculturalism, and we in Europe end up with our Molenbeeks and our Banlieues in Paris, and that's sometimes more of a problem than a pleasure.
But you see, I think it's a mistake to put the burden of explanation or of guilt on the migrants and their diversity.
I didn't.
No, but the general commentary is they're too different, too much cultural distance, too much religious distance, etc. And that is why I invoked Baron von Haussmann, They were just Belgian Catholics, but they were a bit different. And so the scales of difference have changed across time, but there seems to be a real instinct to somehow, it doesn't matter that it's your cousin, so to say, the same phenotype and all of that. And so I think that today we face a double problem. One is, it is even more difficult perhaps to realize to what extent we overlap. With your average Muslim woman, I overlap 90%. There might be a 10% of thick culture where we don't overlap. But that 10% by God, becomes a difficult thing. But the other thing really is the losses. I mean, I think that there is a real fear, and there I trot in. I like to always trot in the non-X. I don't want to put all the burden on the X. Our political classes have failed to do their homework. I mean, there are always exceptions. You might be one of the members.
Tell me about it,
What?
Yeah.
So they are not trying to understand. So if the reaction of people is, okay, to go horizontal, those migrants rather than a system, let's say, that's the easier thing. And instead of our political classes trying to develop a discourse that at least enlightens a bit, they just sit back and they let it all go. And I think that that's a problem. So Angela Merkel was heroic when she says, okay, let's bring in 1 million. But that also is too easy.
That's too easy.
There is real work to be done. And I say, going back into histories, and see, the Italians right now are well accepted in most of Europe. Well, hey, there was a time when they were seen as really, they were the wrong Catholics. I mean, I think that those are important things to remember. So,
well, my last question before I throw it to the floor, because I think we don't have much time, is what you just said, and Martin said in the introduction, that cities should be intentional, and this is, after all, a meeting of urban planners.
Right.
But,
Is it a meeting of urban planners?
Well, some of them are. But here in this country...
I'm not.
No, neither am I.
Okay. There you are. Let them urban planners, right?
We in the past had some unpleasant experience with too much, urban planning, and we had a crazy government that planned where we will all live and where the housing will be, where the factories will be, how many people will fit into one house, and so on and so on. The outcome, unfortunately, Prague was not so much affected by this, but some of our lesser towns have. And I very much liked what you said about densities, that there are densities that are not cities.
Exactly, they're not urban. Yeah.
And in Europe, because we have so much tradition, it's easy to recognize a city. I mean, a city, in a simplified way, it has a church and a cemetery. It has a village green or some public space or a Roman forum or something where people can meet, etc., etc. It is a market where people can do some commerce, and it even has facilities for the people who don't adapt so easily. A place for the village idiot, and all European cities have traditionally been constructed like that. But then you come to LA, and it's a different kind of concept, right?
Right. Am I supposed to comment now on this?
If you wish.
So here's my take. I think that I'm interested in establishing, if you want, or recovering a knowledge space, let's say, about what we call the migration crisis.
That's cool.
That actually brings in more elements than we're deploying now. And we haven't even talked, by the way, though it is in that interview that I did, that I think that I am amazed that the Europeans haven't called on the US. There should have been clear negotiations that before they invaded Iraq, if you're going to invade, we're going to have a lot of troubles, etc. So we're not even going to talk about that dimension. We're just talking about here comes your average immigrant, and not too complicated. And I think that knowledge space should include, for instance, the fights for public transport, public education, access to public housing. Guess who were the ones who fought for that? The outsiders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the outsiders, when they are in your place and you give them a chance, they will fight for rights that encompass everybody. And this is something that the history of Europe makes much clearer, say, than the history of the United States. And those are important histories. If we could generate a more complex understanding of our own history of migration in the past, in other words, there is a documentation. Secondly, the way in which, after a few generations, we're all blah, blah, part of the nation. But that first moment when you first arrive, that's a tough one.
Oh.
And then finally, and this pertains to our epoch, we are all getting screwed, as we say in English, very elegant term. We're in trouble. That is why I showed.
Yeah, we settled in trouble here.
So the city is becoming a shrunken space. It may still look, city. Yeah. Prague indeed is probably a different. I think the small cities have suffered less of it than, And so we've got to recognize this variety of elements, you see, and there is so much work to be done. Why are we spending all our political energy on migrants, which are a minority? I mean, though I think that this new loss of habitat bit is going to generate.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, there was one point in your presentation that I did not quite agree with. I mean, you said that migrations are often planned in the boardrooms of the Pentagon. Historically, I don't think that holds for the United States, with one or two exceptions. So.
Well, no. Of course, I said, but that is part of the story. There are stories like that. And I just mentioned the United States and the Pentagon. It could also, in Germany, it was the corporations. Well, they wanted the migrants to come after World War II. There are moments when you see that fairly clearly. But you're absolutely right that, and moreover, once a migration is, I'm talking about the initiating of migrations. Once a migration is routinized, they have built their own bridge.
Yeah.
And then they just come.
You mentioned
it. But why does a migration begin? Because migrants are a minority in the world. They're a tiny, tiny little minority. There are about, just migrants, regular recognized migrants, there are about 300 million.
Yeah.
That's a tiny little minority. Now, the maldistribution is another issue, right? And so the question really is, why does a migration start? That has been I'm not interested. Once it's routinized, all kinds of things happen.
Well, you know, I'm a psychologist by profession originally, so you know, in my book, you know, the migration starts with our ancient ancestors who were nomads, and whenever you know they ate up all the grass or you know food in a place, they moved on. But that's a beginning of another long discussion.
Yes.
And I would like someone. I have 1 minute left. I can see that, and I would like to open the floor for a question or two. So, is there anyone who wants to ask Professor Sassen a question? I don't see a thing. So, but maybe
no,
someone
we just see black. You look all like a black hole. Pretty, no?
All right. There is someone. Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
There is. You look like we are in a desert where there are no people. The way we're looking, where
maybe
is
there are no people out there.
That was a very good moment.
There's some.
Pretty, yes. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for the exciting lecture. And just a quick question, because I was very fascinated by the topic. Could you just dive a bit deeper into this economy of expropriation and what it means for the city? I think you said, let's skip over, but I was like, we need to hear more of this. So when you say land grabs in the city, what resource are you hypothesizing is going to be extracted? Is it rent? Is it...
That's a good point that you connected the logic of it. So let me give you an instance that has gone totally beneath the radar, though it is in the public domain if you look at contracts, because Singapore, a very well-run economy, just bought a big patch of poor Detroit, the poor part of Detroit. No announcements, no nothing. So my question is, so what's Detroit going to be like in 5 or 10 years? What do we think? Well, we look at the larger region. It's a very rich region. You have so many poor people in Detroit because they were the laid-off workers, etc., you know, of the auto industry. So Detroit will become a corporate center, you know, because there's no way, it's a great space. And so what I see is the beginning, again, with the migrations, you know, this massive loss of habitat, it's just one element in a much larger history with many long traditions. And what I see with the buying of property in cities, many of those properties are like those, you know, they're not intensely used. There's not a clear utility function. So that then leads me to ask, okay, what the hell am I seeing here? And in that sense, to me, there is a deeper history about urban land. You know what? Buying a building might not be the best investment. Controlling a big piece of urban land, that's an investment. That's an investment when there is so much instability in the financial market. Because remember, finance has seen its highest point. Finance is a bit now wobbly. It will recover because governments will help it. Because that's the tragedy, you know that. And then you see this massive loss of habitat that I'm speaking. Add in another variable that I did not talk about, and that is that in today's world, in today's economy, advanced economy, which is marked by intermediation, non-urban sectors all have a deep urban moment. The mines, the plantations, they all have elaborate offices for all the intermediate functions, not the extraction, but the... And so you put it that way, and what I see at least, this is how my mode is discovery, you know, rather than replication, which is a typical social science mode. And so I want to understand, what am I seeing? That is why I don't want to say, that's gentrification. I say, no, let me at least consider something else. So that is sort of an answer to you. I've written about this, so I can also, you know, I'm always ready to give you a text.
Well, by the way, we're witnessing a smaller such phenomenon in this country. You're Dutch originally. Well, many Dutch people buy up land in this country to be on higher ground. Well, thank you so much.
That's very